If you were president for a year today and you had 2 or 3 action items, what would those be?
Obviously, you have to get Joburg right. We have to execute splitting Eskom up into the 3 different parts through public-private partnerships. I'm a big believer in public-private partnership as the way to get the infrastructure right and create the opportunities. I would try and devolve a hell of a lot of what government thinks they can do into the private sector through public-private partnership, but it has to be the right partners. That's very important. And I would modify the way BE works to focus on what we were talking about earlier, social upliftment. If the private sector puts effort into social upliftment, giving people skills, developing skills, creating opportunities for them, helping build entrepreneurs, I think you can have a very transformative society.
Welcome to Investec Minds, a video podcast series on Investec Focus Radio SA. In each episode, analysts from the equity research team at Investec Corporate Investment Bank sit down with a former chief executive who helped define their industry at a critical point in its history. Together, they revisit the decisions that shaped companies and markets, reflect on the leadership choices made under pressure, and examine how the industry has evolved since.
Hi, I'm Nkateko Mathonsi. I am the head of equity research at Investec and also a mining analyst, have been covering the space for the past 10 years.
And I'm Ross Krige, an equity analyst covering the South African banking sector.
It is most fitting to start this series with our ex-Group CEO, Stephen Koseff. Over the past 39 years, Stephen has played a pivotal role in shaping the Investec culture and strategic direction, helping build Investec into the institution that it is today. We are very grateful and excited for an opportunity to reflect with Stephen on some of the critical moments that shaped his journey and also just the insights on the world today. I want us to start with one of the comments you made when you were stepping down as Group CEO in 2018 regarding retirement. And you said it was not retirement as we know it. It's a start of a new chapter. You would not be playing golf 4 days a week. So I just want to know, how has the transition been, Stephen? Are you playing golf at all?
I haven't played golf since COVID, so I'm not playing golf at all at the moment. But I'm doing a lot of walking, because in Australia you can walk a lot. So in my spare time I walk, or I take a gap and I do about an hour and a half walk. But apart from that, I'm still working most days. My factory setting is I must just keep working to keep my mind active.
And Stephen, you are joining us from Australia, where you have been spending more time with family. How has that experience influenced this new chapter in your journey?
I spend a fair amount of time online in South Africa, and I visit South Africa about 4 or 5 times a year, sometimes an extended visit. You know, I was familiar with Australia because we used to have a bank here, and I do have networks and relationships here. So I'm doing some Australian work, but I'm still doing some international stuff. So I'm still on the board of Investec PLC and Investec Limited, and then I also on another public company board called Bidcorp, which is listed on the JSE, but its biggest businesses are outside of South Africa, including Australia.
What are you deliberately saying yes to in this new chapter of your journey? And most importantly, what are you choosing to say no to?
Now, I'm not in any corporate decision making other than stuff that comes to a board, so it's not day-to-day stuff. Obviously, in my private capacity, I do chair a credit fund, so that lets me still look at deals and say yes or no. I chair a private equity fund, and I also again get the ability to look at deals and say no or yes. So still pretty much the same type of stuff, except the scale of it is not anywhere near what it was when I was CEO of the bank and chairing some of the risk committees.
It sounds like a very busy life still, but yeah, I'm glad it's different to what it used to be.
Someone said to me when they retire, they're going to spend a third of their time on business activities, a third of their time on charitable work, and the other third on maybe on their personal stuff and leisure stuff. So that was quite good advice, and I don't know if I managed to do it that way, but I am mindful of spending time in different aspects of my life.
Stephen, you've talked a bit about being in a more non-executive capacity and just thinking in terms of leadership from that perspective and persistence in particular as I guess a key element behind leadership. Could you tell us more about the time that you had to camp outside Trevor Manuel's office and what that taught you about persistence?
It was when we tried to get permission to list in London. And Trevor Manuel, the then Minister of Finance, kept the door shut on us. So eventually we camped in his office. Hugh Herman and myself. Hugh Herman was our chairman, and we sat there waiting for him to arrive to actually go through the process of enabling us to get a listing in London. It took us from 1998 till 2001 to get that right. He ended up saying we have to do the dual-listed structure, which is the structure that Investec has today, because originally we were looking for a listing in London that would own South Africa, similar to what Old Mutual had done, what Data had done, and what Anglo American had done. But by that time, he said no more of those types of structures.
Is there anything in particular about negotiations or, I guess, having to keep knocking on a door that you could take away that you put to use later?
Yeah, I think it was just don't give up. If you've got something that you need to do in life and it makes sense, keep banging on the door and don't give up. And eventually they'll capitulate or they'll see the logic. I mean, he was just being emotional about it at the time, that no, you're not listing in London. And eventually we came up with a structure that worked for him and worked for us and still works for Investec today. And that's why the banks are totally separate. And London has an A rating and South Africa is below investment grade. So I think it really worked out well for us, because otherwise I don't think we would have been able to operate in London as a South African subsidiary.
I think it also talks to the culture of Investec, the out-of-the-ordinary entrepreneurial culture of Investec. If you look back over your tenure as Group CEO, what are those one or two moments or decisions that you think helped set the tone for this Investec culture?
What we realized quite early in life was that culture was important. Bernard, who worked with me and brought in this guy, Professor Alan Zimler, and he was a professor at Wits Business School in organizational development, and he's the one who really helped us with culture and helped us understand that how important culture is in building an organization. Very early on, it came with the concept of that anyone could talk to anybody about anything at any time, and that's why our people at Investec had that persistency. Sometimes if they wanted to do a deal, they would come and nag, they'd come to your desk. They would even follow me to the car park when I was going home at 7 o'clock at night and still nag about the deal so that they knew that they were going to get a hearing. So that culture was, that can-do attitude, very embedded in the Investec culture. You don't just take no for an answer if you really believe in something. Now, there are times when no has to be the answer, the deal is terrible, can't do this deal, and they'd nag and come back, but the no stuck. Ability to question, to challenge, to not just accept no was, and I think still is today, a very important part of Investec.
I can say with comfort that in my 3.5 years here, that culture's very much looks alive and well. Just interested in how did you operationalize that culture as the business grew beyond just a few people into thousands of people?
And look, I think we spend a lot of time with the people talking about culture. There are lots of processes within the organization. The people who lead the organization today have been in the organization for decades. So they became very familiar with the culture and they've enabled it to be perpetuated, which I think is very important. You do sometimes get people in the organization who've got leadership roles that don't live the culture, and sometimes you have to deal with them, in either coach them into living the culture, or sometimes they don't hang around.
And Stephen really lived the culture. I remember when I joined Investec, I would go to the restaurant and he would walk in and be greeting everyone in every table. So that accessibility to leadership, that was very new for me, coming from an environment where the culture was completely different.
Yeah, and I think that was the whole purpose, was to enable anyone to talk to anybody about anything. And that's why we took away titles. Titles were functional, not status. So that people, a young starter could question and challenge. And that's always been a very important component of the culture. And very good ideas come from that, because sometimes it's not just leadership that understands what to do. Youngsters understand what to do better than leadership at times.
Stephen, we've spoken about culture and leadership, but I guess these values are ultimately tested in areas like capital allocation. There's quite a few South African corporates, again, looking to move offshore at the moment. And Investec obviously has its own rich history of trying things overseas. Any advice you'd give to some of the current day execs looking at moving offshore?
We made a lot of mistakes. We were able to pivot and navigate through the mistakes. It's not as easy as it looks sometimes. So just be wide awake and make sure that if it doesn't work out, you can navigate and pivot and get back to the right path. I can remember when we started in the UK, we bought a small bank called Allied Trust Bank in 1992 from Barclays. They had 50-odd people, decided Bernard must go and park there for 3 months. It was before he immigrated to London. And he found me, he says, they cut me out of everything. They don't let me into the meetings. And so what we ended up doing is firing the CEO and sent someone from South Africa to run it, who understood our culture. That was enabled the beginning of the transformation of that organization into Investec. Because if those guys who we'd bought, they would have just continued to keep it as their own home and not let us in. Exactly what they did to Bernard in the early days. When you buy something internationally, every country is different. It looks the same on paper, but it is very different. The cultures are very different. I'm not talking about organizational cultures. The people cultures are different, which I think we learned quite well over a long period of time. But in the early days, you hit roadblocks. We were the type of organization that was flexible and adaptable. And ultimately, what we found is the people loved our culture. Obviously, we made mistakes. We bought up in America, the mid to late 90s, and then you had September the 11th, and we sold everything and just kept a small little shop there. So you've always got to keep pivoting to try and build a sustainable organization. And I think the key thing is that whatever you do, make sure that it's not something that can stick you out if it goes wrong, that you can recover. Because some stuff does go wrong.
Talking about looking the same, I thought that was an interesting point, just because if you look at the UK and Australia, for example, a foreigner would maybe look at them as similar markets. Obviously, for Investec, the UK worked out well, Australia maybe not quite as planned. If you could maybe talk about what drove those different outcomes.
Obviously, the UK, we'd sent very senior management to the UK. They were Investec grown. A lot of the staff were transferred from Johannesburg, similar to Australia, actually, and were integrated into the organisation. We had guys now who ultimately became chairman of the Bank of England. Sir Bradley Freed was with us for about 10 years. We sent guys like Richard Fawley, Dave van der Walt, Leon Blitz. You won't remember some of these guys because they're no longer with us. They all made a difference in terms of integrating the people into the culture and the organisation. Australia could have worked out quite well. We decided to sell the bank in 2014. We got a good price from the Bank of Queensland, and we thought we'd make it a branch. It was a branch until the UK guys in 2020 decided, no, the place is too far, and that 11 hours time difference in British winter and Australian summer was too much to cope with. Whether one agrees with that strategy or not, I don't know. I think we could have had a great business here. It is an environment that is different but similar. It lives between the UK and South Africa, actually, the Australian culture. It's not quite the UK culture. It's definitely not the South African culture, but somewhere in between. We were going through the post-financial crisis and post-European crisis trauma. We were reshaping the business. 2008, you've had a lot of incidents. You had Europe blow up, Ireland blow up in 2010, Greece and Europe blew up in 2011, 2012. Then we had Brexit in 2016. Then you had COVID in 2020. There's been a lot of stuff that has happened. And normally you get a clean run of about 20 years, 25 years. We've had a lot of bumps in the road that one has had to navigate.
You are listening to Investec Minds, a vodcast conversation grounded in the work of Investec's equity research team. Our analysts cover around 80 listed JSE companies, including the majority of the LC40, as well as leading mid and small cap businesses and companies active across the rest of Africa. We combine deep company insight with macro and sector research to deliver independent analysis, financial modeling, and investment expertise that supports institutional decision-making. Through close relationships with management teams and sector stakeholders, we provide insight into the trends shaping markets, helping investors develop strategies across cycles and geographies. To learn more about Investec Equity Research, visit investec.com. And now, back to the conversation.
If you could relive 1 year of your tenure as a Group CEO, which would it be and why?
Maybe 2007, because we bought a business called Kensington Mortgages just before the world blew up, and it gave us a big headache for about 18 months, maybe even longer. So I'd want 2007 over again so we don't do some of the stupid things that we did that put us under pressure in 2008, 2009. Every year is a different year and you learn a lot, and sometimes you have to do the stupid things to learn from them as long as they don't blow you up. So fortunately, nothing blew us up on the way.
Coming back to the South African domestic banking sector and the retail banking side in particular, it's obviously there have been changes for years, but at the moment, I guess you could argue we're seeing an acceleration with some of the insurers starting banks. Old Mutual and Discovery come to mind. Retailers like Pepkor talking about opening up banks ahead of the SARB NPS that's pushing quite hard for financial inclusion. And the traditional banks, I guess, trying to figure out these dynamics. Where do you think the sector lands on a sort of 5 to 10 year view?
Look, I think we see with a bank like Capitec, they've done exceptionally well. They started, I don't remember, about 20 odd years ago. And I think they've got the second biggest market cap out of all banks in South Africa. So you're going to have some great success stories and you're going to have some failures, which is always the case. And you've seen that right throughout banking history. I can remember when online banking became a thing to do. In the UK, they had banks somewhere. They were named Egg and all sorts of funny names that were launched out of retail banks. And eventually the retail bank took them back inside and said, okay, no, we're just going to make you a part of our core being. So you're always going to get this competition come at a segment. And I think about an Investec, it's very focused on a certain segment of the market, which always comes under attack. But what really is becoming under attack is that emerging retail client. If you think of Capitec, now Pepkor wanting to come in, Old Mutual wanting to come in, Time Bank, African Bank, everyone coming at a particular market segment. So you've just got to stay focused, make sure that you look after your client base, you deliver the right product and the right service to the client base. So, but you will get this competition coming at you. And you might get that crowd in the UK, Revolut, they also look like they want to apply for a banking license in South Africa.
On artificial intelligence in particular, you would have obviously seen some of the US stocks over the last couple of weeks, the likes of the insurance brokers, software businesses, wealth managers. Just interested in your perspective on the wealth management side in particular and how profound the AI impact might be.
Reading an article today by Howard Marks, I don't know if it was in the FT, but it was in the Australian Financial Review, how AI is going to play a massive role, but that at the end of the day, you still need some human judgment. I mean, the youngsters will try this a lot, is not use wealth managers at all and just use AI and their own judgment. Whether they'll be successful or not, I don't know. Are they getting the right kind of inputs? Yes, AI is hell of a clever, and maybe it can do what wealth managers do for people. I still come from that generation that thinks that you need the tech on the one hand, but you need the relationship on the other hand, because not everyone will know exactly what to do. And I think it's a threat for jobs. I was listening to Chris Holdsworth the other day saying AI is doing what his analysts used to take 3 months to do in about an hour. There obviously are threats, but you've always had technology as a threat to certain types of jobs. When I started out life, we used to write our books manually. I was an accountant. And then you started using computers. And today the level of sophistication is such that you probably don't need a fraction of the people that you would have needed in those days. Yeah, I think we're just going to have to pivot, make sure that we use it in the right way.
So, Stephen, with increased competition and potential disruption for the financial services, I think the other question is where the next wave of growth is going to come from. And recalling from the conversations I had Mining Indaba, the scale of opportunity that Africa offers is actually vast, especially with its endowment in critical minerals. So my question is, do you think the banking executives have got a full appreciation of the opportunity that the broader Africa actually presents at this point in time?
I think a lot of South African banks have expanded into Africa. So I do think everyone is looking in that direction, recognizing that it is a land of opportunity. And that's going to be important in future growth and development. And if they can get their financial structures right, it can be a great place to do business. But there's still a lot for them to do. So that's always been the challenge. Are the governments in Africa going to be business friendly at the end of the day that enables their countries to take advantage of the opportunities in which they have? That's still going to be the big test. So there is a massive opportunity. Just you need to create the right kind of political framework to take advantage of that opportunity.
100%. And maybe to pivot a little bit into the social stuff, we've spoken about growth, capital, opportunity, but when it comes to Africa, I think the leadership roles carries a broader mandate. You were very pivotal in initiating some of the very key CSI programs, and I think ProMets is top of mind for me. And this is a program that actually provided extra lessons for both maths and science to high school students. It's a program that has delivered tremendous results. You also a co-founder of the Youth Employment Services. And my question is, what convinced you that these are the areas where business actually needed to step in?
So I think in any society, you've got to create opportunity for the people. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they're going to take away the opportunity for the corporates because the system won't allow you to run a free market system. And I'm a big believer in a free market system, but at the same time, I'm a believer in that corporate expertise being used for social upliftment. And that's why we at Investec always said we live in society, not off it, and therefore we have to play a role to help uplift people. And the key area where you can help uplift people is mainly through education and creating the right kind of opportunity. ProMaths was obviously the ideal program for that. The Youth Employment Service was a public-private partnership between government and business, and I became co-chair of that alongside Colin Coleman, who used to run Goldman Sachs in South Africa. Although we didn't achieve the numbers of jobs that the deputy president at the time, which today's president, wanted us to achieve, we're still close to 250,000 jobs. But he wanted 1 million, but we'll get there. I can remember the one guy did an internship in a bakery, and he started making cupcakes at night. This was a guy in KZN. It wasn't in a bakery. We sent him to hotel school. And after halfway through the program, he jumped off the program because he was having such success in selling his cupcakes that he opened his own bakery. And he eventually employed 12 of his family members. So you can see that one skill, how many jobs that one skill can create. So this is very important for South Africa, which has very high unemployment, is how do we educate our people that they become relevant in society and that they can go out there and get a decent job. I mean, we've had some very good people who've done pro-maths who were not very strong at maths, and we gave them the right kind of tutorship, and these people are done masters in engineering today. This is how you build a country, by educating people and creating opportunity. And that's where one gets very hopeful for South Africa. If we all play a role, and the corporates do play a role. When I compare South African corporates to corporates in the UK or corporates in Australia, they don't have the same social upliftment objectives.
I come from Limpopo and I know the water challenges there, and to see Investec be involved, that is critical. And if the banking sector is going to move into Africa, the social aspect becomes even more important.
Well, we've done 1,400 villages across Africa, 230 in South Africa.
On the social aspects, what do you think of the role that corporate SA is currently playing in strengthening the economic trajectory of South Africa?
They are critical. And I think when I was involved in business leadership, which was before I retired, and I was involved in the Banking Association, we try to play a very strong role in helping and assisting government. And I think that still exists today. And I think, more and more so, government don't have capacity. We've seen that in South Africa. The capacity sits in the corporate world. And that's why public-private partnerships are so important for the growth and development of South Africa. It is important for some of the stuff that the state-owned enterprise to do be corporatized and be run by corporates, because there isn't the capacity or the capability in South Africa, unfortunately, in these enterprises. Whereas in the corporates, there is. You can see it with the Youth Employment Service. As the role we play to facilitate jobs really makes a difference. And we're using the corporate sector on both sides to pay for the jobs and to provide internships and to do it for other people as well. Developed countries have their civil servants are very skilled, whereas in South Africa we're not there yet, unfortunately. And that will take time.
Stephen, there appears to be cautious optimism emerging in South Africa despite the persistent structural challenges. From where you're sitting now, how do you read this moment for the country?
And I look at the overall picture, and you look at the 10-year bond rate, it's gone from 11.04 to 7.8 in 11 months. For that, we have to thank Lesetja, because he's managed to get inflation into the mid-threes, which are lower than some of the developed economies. That says that interest rates can still come down by a couple of percent, which will enable people to borrow more or to borrow. So I do think there is room for optimism. I think the fact that the GNU is held, I think is positive, and that people are seeing that South Africa can become a centrist type country. The ANC is centre left, the DA may be centre right, but if they stay in alliance, you get rational decisions. Plus, with lower inflation and lower interest rates and foreign investment starting to look at the place, you can make a massive difference. The fact that rates have come off 300 basis points is telling you a story. So I think there is room for optimism. And if we look at the city of Cape Town and how it's governed and the amount of tourism and the people around there, you walk around, you don't hear English being spoken. It tells you a story that people are coming to South Africa. So if they can get Joburg right, Cape Town properties are 6 times the value of the same size in Joburg in a good area. So it tells you a story what governance can do. And if we can get that right as a country, we can fly.
Stephen, you've been quite vocal over the years in the lack of action in government, and we're talking now about maybe that improving through the GNU. If you were president for a year today and you had 2 or 3 action items, what would those be?
Obviously, you have to get Joburg right. We have to execute splitting Eskom up into the 3 different parts through public-private partnerships. Those are things we had on the table almost 10 years ago to say how are we going to make sure that we have an adequate supply of electricity. I think they've done quite well of late and through the changes in leadership. But now you have to go the next step. You can't go back to where we came from. And the same applies to a lot of infrastructure. Now, I always go back to the toll road. We did the N4 toll road as Investec. It was a public-private partnership. It was done in 1995, 1996. We gave it back after 30 years to the government, who then retendered it and got, I think the number was 10 billion rand. And they never had to pay a cent. And it was always neat and tidy and always worked because the owners had to look after it. So I'm a big believer in public-private partnership as the way to get the infrastructure right and create the opportunities. I would try and devolve a hell of a lot of what government thinks they can do into the private sector through public-private partnership, but it has to be the right partners. That's very important. And I would modify the way BE works to focus on what we were talking about earlier, social upliftment. If the private sector puts effort into social upliftment, giving people skills, developing skills, creating opportunities for them, helping build entrepreneurs, I think you can have a very transformative society.
Stephen, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I think one of the reasons we actually started this series was also to celebrate the contribution that many of our ex-CEOs have actually made in South Africa. And it was very evident here in terms of your success. Culture and the right culture is the golden thread to many of your achievements. Being very involved and living in society and not out of it, that also came out very strongly. But yeah, it's a big thank you from us, the Investec research team, and we're just grateful that we get this opportunity where we can actually celebrate these contributions. Thank you so much, Stephen. This was indeed an out of the ordinary conversation. I hope you play a little bit more golf going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. That was super interesting.
You've been listening to Investec Minds on Investec Focus Radio SA. If you enjoyed this conversation, follow Investec Focus Radio SA on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss future episodes. And if this discussion added value, please consider sharing or leaving a rating. It helps others discover the series and keeps the conversation growing. Please note that the views expressed in this episode are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Investec. This content is for information purposes only and does not constitute investment, financial, or other professional advice. Corporate and Investment Bank is a division of Investec Bank Limited and an authorized financial services provider and registered credit provider.